very close to the first national rail shutdown that this country has experienced on the freight railroad since 1992. And, so basically the better part of most of our lifetimes. And, it took a long road for us to get here. And in fact, there are many hurdles that have to be cleared in order for a rail strike initiated by the 12 unions representing freight rail workers or the rail carriers who own the railroad companies. If they initiate lockouts, a lot of hurdles have to be cleared for them to legally be allowed to do that. And there's a reason for that, because a century ago, this country saw just how much power working people have in this country, especially on the railroads. They had the power to bring the economy of this country to its knees. And they showed that when they struck on the railroads. The railroad workers struck in 1922. There was the Great Railroad Strike of 1877. There was, of course, the Pullman Strike in 1894, right? The establishment learned its lesson from those strikes, and, it snapped into action by pushing through via Congress and the business class that it serves, the Railway Labor Act of 1926. The Railway Labor Act is the thing that governs labor relations on the railroads, not the National Labor Relations Act like most other jobs. And there's a reason for that. Essentially, the Railway Labor Act is there to prevent a strike from happening on the country's railroads because of how vital the railroads are to the supply chain, to the economy, even national security, so on and so forth, right? So why do I mention that? Because the contract negotiations... the contract negotiations that have stalled, that have been fruitless, have been going on for over 2 years. And again, these are contract negotiations between the National Carriers Conference. There's so many acronyms from the union side and the business side that I get them jumbled up. But basically the amalgamated group that represents the 7 Class 1 freight railroads at the bargaining table during periods of bargaining. And then there, as I mentioned, the 12 or 13, depending on how you count it, amalgamated craft unions representing over 100,000 workers on the country's Class 1 freight railroads, right? So these negotiations have been going on for 2.5 years. They haven't been getting anywhere. The rail carriers refuse to address the longstanding problems that Mel's going to talk about in a second. And we officially reached an impasse in late spring of this year after, again, a provision from the Railway Labor Act kicked in. The National Mediations Board stepped in to try to broker an agreement between the two sides. It was unable to do so. The sides were offered the option of entering into binding arbitration, and they rejected that. Then an impasse was officially declared, thus initiating a 30-day cooling off period. This was in June. So as that cooling off period counted down, we were getting close to a strike. But another provision in the Railway Labor Act also kicked in at the 11th hour, which was President Biden appointing a presidential emergency board, a special board that is designed to step in situations like these, assess the claims from both sides, issue a formal report recommending a solution to the contract dispute. Both sides have the ability to reject those recommendations. So the Presidential Emergency Board released those recommendations in late August. Essentially, the solution that it came up with was to throw more money at these workers and address none of the workplace safety, quality of life, or any of the other destructive policies that have destroyed the freight rail industry, the supply chain, and the workers who make it run. It addressed none of that. It kicked all that down the road. It threw more money at workers. It uncapped their healthcare costs, which would eat up a lot of those wage gains, so on and so forth. So after that happened in August, the two sides had the ability to kind of review the recommendations. The carriers, again, the business side of this, enthusiastically endorsed the Presidential Emergency Board's recommendations. So that should tell you right there that something might be amiss. The workers, of course, by and large, have rejected these recommendations because they don't address the issues that have brought us to that point. So that's how we've ended up here because a number of the leadership of the different craft unions have said that they would accept the terms of the Presidential Emergency Board as the terms for a new contract, but membership still has to vote, right? And so we still haven't had a lot of those votes. We have had a number of them have outright rejected that this week. Two, as of today, have accepted those. That's the Transportation Communications Union and the Brotherhood of Railway Carmen, who collectively represent around 11,000 workers. So right now, at the 11th hour, and then I'll shut up, we are in this kind of melee where Congress is freaking out, Biden's freaking out. The Democrats in general are freaking out because Biden's polling numbers had finally bounced back. We're close to the midterms, and that's all they're really thinking about. They know what the economic impact of a rail shutdown could do to those polling numbers. So right now, Congress is essentially deciding if it will force workers back to work like Congress and President Bush did back in 1992. The question then after that is, will workers obey that order?
Mel, what do you think?
Well, just to sort of add on to this discussion, at stake here, and something that has been sort of a main point of contention in contract negotiations for the last many years, has not only just been the issue of stagnant wages, particularly in the era of COVID, where we are seeing rising costs of inflation and things of that nature, as well as the sort of health insurance issues, right? The rising health insurance premiums and things like that. We're also talking about what the sort of the rail workers have called sort of quality of life issues. And what that means is that at least two of the rail carriers, BNSF and what's the other? One other rail carrier has instituted what workers have called a draconian sort of attendance policy that essentially makes it impossible for workers to have a day off. They are expected to be on call 24/7. There is no set scheduling for these workers. They are required to, call in to see if they are supposed to set up and start a shift at a terminal at some point within, an hour to 2 hours of when they're supposed to be there. This can happen at any time of the day or night. They can usually be out on a call, on a shift, 12 hours on a train, spend anywhere from 10 to 12 hours in a hotel, do another shift. They're gone from home for, a couple days at a time. And this whole time they're expected to essentially be at the beck and call of the railroads. And what that means is, these folks are, a lot of these guys that I've spoken with over the last 5 months or so, they're relatively young guys. They're in their late 30s, early 40s. They've got kids, they've got family. A lot of these folks have young children. Multiple of these individuals that I've spoken with over the last couple of years have, barely been able to make the birth of their children because of the scheduling, right? If there's no way to potentially think of an emergency 5 months down the road because the railroads are asking them to schedule this time off. How can you schedule off a sudden death in the family or an accident, right? Or your child gets sick with COVID and ends up in the ER. You know what I mean? These are the types of things that they're, asking workers to plan for somehow. You know what I mean? And the problem is that these contracts don't address these problems. And these problems have been ongoing for at least since December. Earlier this year, the workers were attempting to essentially initiate a strike as part of a longstanding grievance due to these attendance policies. And Max can tell you more about this because he covered this more in depth. But essentially what happened is that the courts blocked any sort of strike action that maybe would have been able to sway the rail carriers from instituting this really effed up attendance policy. You know what I mean? You're asking an already overburdened workforce that has been subject to years and years of layoffs, of stagnant wages, of unsafe working conditions, of lack of crew on trains, and this continued stress of an already sort of overburdened, beleaguered supply chain that they're trying to prop up, right? And you're asking them to do more. How? They have cut straight through to the bone of this workforce. And now they are sitting across from these unions at the bargaining table, and they are asking them to accept less than what I would consider like a subterranean bare minimum of what should be what the workers should be asking for, what the rail carriers should be giving to their workforce, given how vital they are to the continued running of the economy. And now that we're a day and a half away from a potential rail shutdown, we have the Biden administration scrambling to keep up. We have rail carriers that are initiating preemptive sort of lockouts, right? Stopping shippers from being able to ship their freight across the country. They've stopped shipments of any intermodal freight across, I think in Norfolk Southern completely is done this week. They stopped shipping their intermodal freight as of Tuesday, right? This is days ahead of the shutdown, right? Amtrak has completely canceled all of its service except for its northern corridor. This is pretty intense stuff. And what we are seeing is the sort of contractions and ripples through the economy that the rail carriers say is not because of the labor, right? That their profits are not because of the labor that has been put into it. And by labor, I mean the actual human beings who make this, the supply chain and the freight railroads continue to work. They say these profits are not due to them. It's because we did stock buybacks and we invested in all this crap. And all of the workers are like, that's not true. We're the ones who did this for you. And now that we see the potential of this labor being withheld, the entire system is threatening to sort of fall apart as a result, right? And I don't mean that in a alarmist or in a sort of a way of enacting some sort of grievance against, what is the inevitable ripples in the economy. What we are seeing is workers finally reaching the point where they may be able to withhold their labor in service of securing a contract that they desperately need in order to stay upright, really.
Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.